Welcome to Gray Matters, another show. How many of you out there ever expect to become elderly? Will you get there? Will you get there intact? What is it like? Take down notes, get out your yellow legal pad, because we have a lot of goodies for you to gravitate toward and share with your children and grandchildren, or your grandparents, as the case may be, especially if you may one day be a caregiver. We're blessed with us today to have Elaine K. Sanchez, author, speaker, and gerontologist at large, I guess.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Not as large as this one, but okay.
Thank you, Lee.
Welcome. I like to introduce people to the audience. This has not really been prepped. So we usually begin by asking where you were born, what it was like in your hometown. So where's your hometown?
I grew up on a dairy farm 6 miles northwest of McPherson, Kansas. It was a town of about 10,000 people at that time. I think it's 14,000 now.
Wow. I think I'm as corny as Kansas in August from Oklahoma. So what did you grow on the farm, or what did you raise?
We had dairy cows, and of course we had alfalfa, corn, wheat, milo, soybeans.
Okay.
And it was not an easy life.
Wow. Cold winters?
Miserable winters, and miserable
prairie,
summers.
So
yes,
you have
yes.
many trees to block the snow and the hail. And
yeah, I don't know that there is a season where the wind does not blow in Kansas.
It's rough being a farmer. We're going to have, one day we're inviting the Oregon Farm Bureau on. We're going to learn a little bit about a farmer's life, but that's a whole other show.
Well, this is actually important to my book, Letters from Madeline, Chronicles of a Caregiver, because my parents were farmers, and my dad appeared to be as robust and healthy as any 75-year-old man on the planet. At the time, my mother was 70, and she had she was losing her vision because of macular degeneration. Her back was hunched from osteoporosis. She had a scar that started at her throat and went to her breastbone from open heart surgery.
Wow.
She didn't sleep at night because of her restless leg syndrome.
I know somebody was that,
Yeah, it's miserable.
Did she have sciatica too?
No, I don't think she had that, but she was losing her hearing because of the medication that she was taking for her heart. And then my dad suffered this stroke, and she became his caregiver. So they were isolated out on that farm. And one of the ways that she managed her stress was to go to her computer, disengage her emotional monitor, and write to me about everything she was experiencing and just exactly how she felt about
Ventilation.
Absolutely.
And communication, because
absolutely.
The sense of isolation, particularly when you're old, can be scary.
Yes.
And you need to reach out and have a support system, which was you.
Yes, and writing was very cathartic for her. She
Tell
also
me a little bit about her education and her background.
Oh, my background in it, or hers?
Mama.
Oh, she went to Brown Mackey Business College in Wichita, Kansas. Her parents were just very upset over the fact that she thought she needed education beyond high school. But she was washing the floor one day underneath the table, and she thought, I can do this for somebody else and make enough money to go to school. So she just went to business school.
Good for her.
And she ended up marrying my father, and she was 18, he was 23. In September.
Another guy.
I know, September 1942, and shortly after the wedding he was shipped off to the South Pacific, where he fought in the war for
Marine, you said?
almost 3 years. No, Air Force.
Air Force.
It was the Army Air Corps
So
at that time,
my
actually.
dad too, he was other coast, Corsica and Italy.
Oh, okay. Well, my dad was in the other theater. But
Get to the Philippines?
yes, of course he did. And so when they started their life together on the farm, obviously they were happy to see each other because they had 4 babies in 5 years.
It's quick work.
Quick work. And not the best birth control.
Xerox is not the only reproduction cycle out there.
Well, that's for sure. And life was hard. There was a lot of work. There was never much money. And she learned early on, actually it was in 1960, we had a terrible hailstorm that came through, and it destroyed our crops and the primary source of income for that entire year. And that year, she did two things that changed her life. She got a job in town, and she became a devotee of self-help books.
Oh.
So she would.
I would have liked your mom, because.
Oh, you would have enjoyed her very much. She was reading Norman Vincent Peale, Millard. I can't
Did you
think
read
this.
Benjamin Spock?
Oh, I doubt it. I doubt very much that she read that. She was a New Age thinker before it was kind of a thing. Yes, and which kind of ostracized her from the women in her community. But Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, became her personal hero. And she told me in the milk barn one night about how they had taken away his family, his home, and his business, and how when he arrived in Auschwitz, all he had left was a suitcase in which he was carrying a manuscript of a book that he had been working on for 10 years and the clothes on his back. So they took the suitcase and then they took his clothes. And that was the beginning of 4 years of systematic degradation, humiliation, and control. And he realized about halfway through this that the people who were surviving weren't always the youngest or strongest or healthiest, that a lot of times what determined whether they survived or not depended on their attitude. Now, obviously, you can't, attitude will not save you from
the gas chamber.
From the gas chamber or from dysentery or things like that. But for people who, did not suffer that that destiny, he said that he realized that you could take away every single freedom a person has, except for one, and that's a person's ability to choose his attitude or her attitude toward any given set of circumstances.
That helps you cope. That's your
Yep.
inner compass, really.
So that became her guiding light, I guess you could say. That and over the course of the next 30 years, she had a lot of opportunities to adjust her attitude toward many, many difficult circumstances. All three of my brothers were in the military at the same time in 1970. 2 of them got orders for Vietnam on the same day. The economy of farming never improved. There was never enough money. The cow lot was less than 50 yards from the kitchen door. There was always the stink. There were always flies.
Eternal struggle.
Eternal struggle. And then in the 80s, she took over the care of her parents and my cranky grandpa Stan, who was my dad's father. And then in the late 80s and early 90s, her health went to pot. So
I want to look at this from an observer's point of view. I see that all along the trail of life, she's developing new coping skills.
You're exactly right.
At an early stage, which she can then summon later on.
That's exactly right.
She isn't quite a novice or newbie.
No.
So she's learned from dealing with adversity.
That's exactly right.
And so she's better equipped maybe than the so-called average person. So the message I'm getting from you, your vibes are flowing in my direction, are that when you're young, you can learn things that are going to be applicable later in your life. And never think you're too young to learn things that will be of use later on, especially in so-called old age, and you become a better coper if you learn it earlier.
Well, I don't think she would have ever dreamed, as difficult as things were early on, that she would face her greatest challenges and perhaps her greatest mental and spiritual growth in her golden years. But she did. She did. So it was a very interesting experience. She sent these letters to me every 10 days to 2 weeks during the 6.5 years she cared for my dad. He also developed prostate cancer, which complicated the situation, and he had some stroke-related dementia. So she was not a saint, Lee.
Few of us get to that category.
No. She experienced what every caregiver experiences. She went through periods of times that she was very angry. She was angry with him. She was angry with the situation. She was fearful.
Let me ask you, how did she manifest her anger?
She wrote it. Sometimes she yelled at him.
Okay,
yes, they had a wheat field fire the first summer after Dad had his first stroke, and he went out wanting to help my brother, and he could still drive a tractor, not as well as he had once.
I'm just going to parenthetically, because it came to mind, not to rain on your parade or anyway. My mother used to have a very unique way of dealing with anger. Under the sink, there's like a cabinet under the sink. She would collect old jars, mayonnaise or whatever, and then when she got angry, she had a favorite wall and she would toss them. And guess who had to clean up the mess? I still remember the dust.
That's awesome.
But that was her anger gallery. Some of you out there may want to replicate the Ida-Coyne syndrome.
I spoke at at an Alzheimer's conference in Iowa one time, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she says, I have an anger management program that requires 24 eggs a day. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, tell me about that. And she said, they lived on a chicken farm, and every day when she went out to collect the eggs to sell, she would set aside 24 for herself. And then when the train would come by at 3:56 every afternoon, she would be out there standing at the tracks, and she would throw the eggs at the train. And she said if it was a long train, she would take her time and she would take the aim and she would throw them. And if it was a short train, she threw them really fast. It's like your mom.
It's a variation of snowball also.
Yes, but
So
I
as long as she didn't get eggs on her face, figuratively or otherwise.
I think that probably the thing that helped her most of all was sitting down and writing about it. And she developed a process that she came to call an attitude of creative indifference. And
write that down, creative indifference.
Yes.
Which is explained means?
Well, I figured out, she didn't know that she had a process, but as I was editing her letters into the book, I realized that she did 3 things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the first thing was that she became aware of the situations that were causing her the most amount of stress. And when she was really upset about something, she would go to the computer and she would write it down. And I think your background as a social worker in psychology, you know that writing things down helps get them out of your brain and gives you some clarity when you get it on paper.
Exactly.
So that was the first step. And then the second step is that, and I believe this may be the hardest thing for caregivers to do, and that is accept the situation and accept that it is very difficult and that there are a lot of complicating and contributing factors and things over which you have no control. And you have to get to the point that you can accept a lot of things that you don't want to accept. But she would write her way to that. She would talk about all of the factors involved, and then the third step is to take action. And there are actually 2 choices, I think, when we get to this point. When you look at a situation and identify what the problem is, then you say, is there anything that I can do to change, fix, or improve the situation? And if there is, then it's pretty simple. You make a plan and you execute the plan. Then if there isn't anything over which you have any control, again, you have 2 choices. You can either obsess over it and let it wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, continuously, or you can choose to release it. And so she was very good at venting, looking at it, accepting the situation, and then determining, is this something over which I have some control? And if so, doing something about it, and if not, then releasing it. She was a student of Unity.
Oh yeah, they're in Missouri.
Lee Summit, Missouri.
Yeah, I visited their place once.
Yeah.
Beautiful chapel.
Yeah, and it's kind of based on, it's a combination of, I would say, Christianity a New Age thought.
Mm-hmm.
And she really believed that in that saying, let go and let God. You know, of just saying when she would come up against something that she simply could not handle, just say, okay, God, you take it. And just giving that up. She had a very irreverent but profound belief in God.
Good. Okay. Let me share just briefly one of my coping skills that may fit into it in a way. I like to buy time and not make an abrupt decision, almost like with a so-called gun to my head. So accordingly, I get myself involved in a lot of different arenas, whether it's projects in the community or reading or writing. And so I switch gears. If something is bothering me, but I feel not equipped at that given point in time to come up with a solution, I switch gears, I deviate, and I go into a more user-friendly activity, which gives me more confidence, and then I could return to the activity where I may have less confidence, but I'm sort of like re-equipped to deal with it. I don't know if there's an actual name to that. You could call it like an alternate script in a way.
Distraction, allowing your subconscious to work
Decoy
on something.
therapy.
Decoy therapy, I like it.
Decoy therapy. So I've used that, and some of you out there may want to use that and all, because very often pressures and people out there will try to get to twist your arm and get you to make a decision and choose a course of action before you're ready to. You may need to gather more information before you can make the right decision.
And some of the things, if you're talking about medical community and doctors, sometimes what they recommend, understanding that their job is to prolong life, may not be the best decision for the individual.
And the question is, does it also prolong profit for the medical establishment? I'm a little skeptical. My mother was like that. When she would speak to a doctor, she would ask him, you know, what's his angle? Why is he recommending a certain medicine or what have you? Just a super skeptic and all. And I'm about to go in for surgery next week, and one of the things I have learned is that you need to ask up front the billing department what other patients who had the same operation were charged on your health plan. A lot of people never thought about that, but I mean they don't invent a special price billing for you, but a lot of people don't think it through and say, well, there have been other people who've had this surgery on my health plan. Let's find out how much they bill to Medicare and how much was the customer's thing like that. And you could always call the hospital and find out what their experience has been and how much the anesthesiologist would usually cost, and you put together the pieces, because most hospitals have you just blindly sign an open blank check saying, I will assume responsibility for whatever the heck they charge me, and you don't do the research of what they're going to charge you. And to me, that's not ethical.
I don't think a lot of people think about doing that, but it's probably a very good idea, especially if you are going to be paying a lot of this out of your own pocket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you have a hospital visit for surgery, not ER, or some other long-term process, contact the hospital and contact your health insurance provider and find out what they generally charge for similar operation for other people, and do the checks and balances, so you can kind of gather what your costs are going to be, because it's going to be partly in your head to pay part of it at least. Okay,
And that,
let's get back to your caregiver.
Okay.
So your mother ventilated by putting it in writing. Now, she would have to have a daughter that was supportive in writing back to make her feel that her writing has some useful.
Actually,
so you have to share your part of the.
She wrote to me.
Team.
She wrote to me for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
It released her stress, and she had the time. At that point in my life, because calling on the telephone was expensive. And at that time in my life, I had more money than time. So she would write to me and then I would call her. She could understand my voice on the telephone. And so I would always call her back and respond to her letters.
Good.
A typical letter from her could be, 6, 8, 10 pages in length, typed, single-spaced, and printed on both sides of the page. That takes a long time to write. Takes a long time to read. But we did have a lot of communication going back and forth.
What were some of the issues she raised?
Well, the most difficult thing, I think, physically for her was dealing with Dad's incontinence and the sleeplessness. And most caregivers really do struggle with fatigue. There is a reason that they use sleep deprivation as torture. It works. Within 48 hours, you start to really lose your ability to think rationally, and your body really begins to suffer. Because he didn't sleep well at night, she didn't sleep well, and that was very, very difficult. Dad's incontinence was very difficult for her to cope with.
Now the incontinence happened during the night also, I guess.
Yes, day and night.
So she could be woken up when he's crying, you may not use the word incontinence, but I need to change my diaper, come.
He would forget. He would, he would have the Depends on, he would wake up in the night, he would forget that he had difficulty going to the bathroom. He would sometimes pull the Depend off and let go on the bed, on the floor, all over himself, and then she would have to clean it up. There were times toward the end that sometimes she would be changing the sheets 2 and 3 times a night, and that was exhausting and it was frustrating. It was very, very difficult for her. But more than anything, I think you called it adaptive grief. Is that what you called it?
In other words, step by step, that you are dealing with the progressing or regressing loss of a capacity and a loss of the person. They're transitioning into a faraway place that you're not used to.
Yes. And this, for her, was the most difficult part. I think it was, I call it preparatory grief. I've also heard it called anticipatory grief. It is different from grief after death because what you are grieving is the loss of who that person was before the illness. And you're grieving who they were, you're grieving the loss of the present that you thought you were going to have, and you're grieving losses that you know are still ahead in the future. She said many times, she said, my husband died on October 30th, 1993. We just haven't gotten around to burying him yet. And that's how she felt. She said, I think that sometimes when a person has been sick for a long time, it can feel like to the caregiver that person has been dead for as many years. And then she would remind herself, okay, he was not like this before he had the stroke. He was always, very particular with his clothes. He never came in the house with his muddy boots on. He would never walk across the white carpet with his work clothes. And she said he was, he was well read, and he had excellent table manners, and he was always fun to be with. And she said, I was always proud to be his wife. And so she would try to remember.
You hit on a very crucial point when you said, I was proud to be his wife.
Right.
What I'm hearing from you, what I'm relating, is that in a marriage, a lot of the partnership is pride in the other. You relate to them, and it's almost like shared prestige.
Of course.
And particularly,
of course,
in those days, the male was head of household in a much more authoritarian way. And when that authority is lost with the person's increasing incapacity, the prestige diminishes.
That's right.
And this is an analogy. Many years ago, I was in a meditation session, sort of like Indian style with chanting and all. And it was quiet, and you're supposed to listen to the noise. And this comes to mind now. It was right outside an open window where the buses would come by. So you would hear the buses come to the bus stop, and the noise get louder and louder, and the bus would stop, and then the bus would go on, and the noise would become less and less. As the noise became less and less, I see a parallel between your father's fading and becoming less and less in terms of the noise and the image and the sound that he exuded to your mother, and she was dealing with his retreat from the old person.
And that was
is
heartbreaking.
that a fair analogy?
Sure, because he was fun. He was a good golfer. I loved to play golf with him. You know, he had a great sense of humor. He was a great sport. He was just a very good man, and he became very, well, she called it lazy. I think what she didn't understand is that the stroke affected his brain in such a way that it changed a lot of his personality. He was a workaholic, there's no doubt about that before the stroke, and she was so angry with him because he wouldn't do his exercises. You know, he wouldn't squeeze the ball in his right hand so that he could get the use of that back, and he had a very difficult time walking, and she couldn't get him to do his leg exercises.
And she was projecting her own values in a way by
course.
saying, you know, listen, I'm spunky and I could still do it, and I'm not giving up.
Yeah.
And why are you giving up?
Yeah.
So in a way, the anger was because he could not parallel her initiative.
That's true. And
that's what I'm saying as an outsider.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because she said exactly that. I would have never.
He can't keep up with me.
Right. It's difficult. Yeah.
Now your book deals with this.
Well, it does not directly. What the book is her story of caregiving, told in real time through the letters that she wrote to me. So I edited them. It was on Mother's Day 2004. I was invited to speak at our church about mother-daughter relationships. And I decided I wanted people to know who she had been in her own words. And so I went to the garage and I took down this moving box my husband had labeled Letters from Madeline. And I was looking for one letter in particular.
Right.
And I found that letter, and I read an excerpt from it, and I told a couple of stories, and people came up to me afterwards and said, you have to write a book.
And you did.
And I did. It took me 2 years to edit her letters. At first, I just retyped everything that made me laugh or made me cry, and it was about this thick, and so I edited that down by 50%, and then I took it to a friend of mine who was a publisher, and he said, take it down by 40%. It's too long. It's too hard. So I did.
Well, you could have done a trilogy, of course.
I think, you know what,
but not a War and Peace sequel.
Yeah, no, I think it turned out just right. I think his advice was good. Interestingly, I found an agent who really loved the book. She had just taken care of her grandfather through his long illness with Alzheimer's, but she couldn't find a publisher. They all told her, you know, caregiving is depressing. Nobody's going to buy a book on that topic. So I self-published, and then I had a basement full of books, and I thought, now what do I do? You know, it's not enough to write it. You know, I'm going to have to figure out a way to market it. So I started speaking to small groups.
This is something for our friends out there, our audience, because a lot of you aspire to be writers and may have your books in the works. So listen to what Elaine has to say, and this might be the formula you choose to follow.
Let me tell you, it's not an easy formula to follow. Fortunately, somebody asked me a while back, what was the secret to my success in building a speaking and writing business? And I said, I married well. my husband.
You didn't marry a farmer, presumably.
I did not marry a farmer, and my husband was very supportive of me through this whole process of developing everything. He had cared for his first wife through her terminal illness with lung cancer, so he understood how difficult it was, and how much help caregivers need. So I started speaking to small groups, and then it just built. And actually, I was asked to do a workshop. I got a call from Chemeketa Community College for their lifelong learning program.
Yes.
And the man asked me if I did a workshop on caregiving, and I said, yes, of course I do a workshop. And so he hired me to do a workshop. I think he paid me $500 or something like that. And so I spent the next 4 months developing a workshop. And just doing that. And that really made me focus on the strategies that a person can employ to survive this emotional stress. And of course, this has evolved now over the last 8 years. And I've spoken at conferences all over the country, and I've listened to just tremendous people, experts in the field, and I've interviewed hundreds of other caregivers to gain their experience. And now I have this program called Caregiver Survival Training, and I help people figure out strategies, this attitude of creative indifference toward caregiver anger, guilt, depression, and grief. And then develop a program for self-care. And then, as you know, from the book, that about 4 years after my dad started wearing adult diapers, he turned to my mother one day at the breakfast table and said, Madeline, it occurs to me that you don't want to have sex with me anymore. And she said, that's right, Quentin, that part of our life is over. And then he said, well, if you're not willing to have sex with me, would it be okay with you if I had sex with somebody else?
And their answer was?
And she said, you know what? Knock yourself out. Just go for it. She said, I figured if he could find someone who was willing to have sex with him, she could have all of him. She could change his wet sheets in the middle of the night. She could pick him up off of the floor when he fell. She could deal with his wet depends, and she could just have him all to herself.
Transfer time.
So,
did he go for that?
yes, as a matter of fact, he did. So the next morning at breakfast, he turns to her and he said, Madeline, would you call Avis? Now, Avis was not the car rental company. He was actually talking about the girl that he had taken to his high school senior prom.
A different kind of rental.
Yeah, 60 years earlier.
And he was spinning, his wheels are spinning something.
His wheels are spinning. And who knows what triggered this. But this story just went on for months and months. And, every few weeks.
Lesson here, interpretation time. When you're feeling a part of your life of deprivation, the imagination makes you hop back to a part of your life which is your nirvana point, the new term. And this was his nirvana point, the unconsummated romance with his prom queen, or what have you.
Well, maybe it was unconsummated. I'm sure that was. But you bring up an important point.
Yes.
What we did not know at the time, and what I learned after Dad's death and after Mom's death, is that surprising and inappropriate sexual behavior is not at all unusual among people who have had strokes, individuals who have Alzheimer's, or people who take dopamine to control the symptoms of Parkinson's. So, just as losing the use of his right hand was a result of the stroke, this the pleasure trigger monitor in his brain had been damaged, and his ability to understand what was and what was not appropriate social behavior had also been damaged. And this was very difficult, and it's very difficult for people who are caring for loved ones who have Alzheimer's, because they look pretty much the same.
The old ground rules are thrown out.
Yes.
Disconnect.
Yes, it's true. It's true. We didn't know it. And, you know, I think that my mother was amazing in that she eventually came to the point that, well, she tried to sit down with him and just have a rational, reasonable conversation, the way they had always worked out things during their 56 years of marriage. And then she said, you know, about 15 minutes into it, I realized he is just not playing with a full deck. So she decided to have fun with the story. And so she called Avis and she told her why my dad wanted to see her so often. And Avis's husband was
amused.
Well, I think he was pretty stunned, because Avis was actually on a walker and an oxygen tank. But
A new meaning for the last hurrah.
But I think Avis had a lot of fun going to the beauty shop and telling her cousin and girlfriends, you know, that she had this amorous boyfriend in McPherson, and her husband may have looked at her and said, well, maybe somebody else finds her irresistible, and maybe I should look at her a little different. Va-va-va-voom. But, you know, it was interesting because she said that she just realized that this was not who he had been through their marriage, and she just made a conscious decision not to be angry or jealous or upset about it. And she and Avis became good friends. So she just, you know, constantly she would come up against these things that would create stress. I mean, you know, your spouse asking you to arrange you to have a sex date with an old girlfriend, that's stressful and upsetting.
New meaning for resurrection.
Well, that's what he was hoping for.
Did you want to introduce us and read a segment from your book so that the
Oh, I think, you know,
the people
maybe.
at home, or
Yes, I think this one is kind of fun.
something poignant,
Yes,
meaty.
yes. This was actually an excerpt that I read at the church in 2004. She had been reading Dr. Wayne Dyer's book, Your Erroneous Zones, and it made her so angry. She said, you know, he just keeps, two things she said that upset me about that book. She said, he just keeps pounding away at this idea that a person should do what he or she wants to do. And this is what she said. Dear Elaine, as an old lady, I'm here to tell anyone who will listen that life is not made up of doing what you want to do. When I look back over my life, it is hard to see what I have done just for myself. I can't see anything so wonderfully exciting or invigorating about getting up in the morning, fixing breakfast, doing dishes, making the bed, picking up the papers, doing laundry, fixing lunch, doing dishes, and doing some more laundry and housework. An exciting day for me might include having a good telephone conversation or possibly meeting an interesting person in the grocery store or on the street. And for this, I should spend money on vitamins. I should try to eat right and exercise so I can prolong this wonderful life experience. Ha! She says, my greatest joy in life comes from learning and growing mentally and spiritually. And the thing about having your space and happiness from within is that a person can stay more or less detached and still do what has to be done to give other people a reasonable amount of happiness.
Amen, sister.
Amen. So that is her
Distilled wisdom.
tone. Yes. And it was, her letters were unflinchingly honest. A lot of times they were very raw. But when I speak or when other people read about her experiences, they say she gives me permission to be human. That she says out loud things that people only think about and sometimes feel a little guilty or ashamed of thinking.
Ralph Waldo Emerson, the philosopher, once said, "A friend is a person before whom I may think aloud."
Oh, yeah.
I like to use that as my guideline.
Yeah. That's good. Well, obviously...
Well, this book of quotations has some very
it's a great quote.
interesting. And
yes.
I used to read it as a kid because that's a quick way to get a shortcut to get to the knowledge of the world. Shortcuts in life.
Shortcuts are good. Shortcuts are good.
Yes. So, do you have any thoughts as to, from this caregiver experience, what you could share with other people out there that they might apply to their lives?
Oh, well, I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, we have about 4 minutes left.
Okay. My husband and I have developed a website called caregiverhelp.com. And I was on a plane home from a speaking engagement one night, and a man that was sitting next to me asked me what I did, and I told him, and he said, "So if I went to your website at 3 o'clock in the morning and I was absolutely desperate for help to get through the night, would I find it on your website?" And I was like, no, you wouldn't. What you would find is information about my book and about me as a speaker. And so I thought I could create a video-based website with stories and strategies and animated videos in about 6 months.
Right. He was asking for what's called the crisis hotline approach.
Yeah. So we did it. And it took about 3 years to get it right. So I have about 4.5 hours of videos.
Wow.
I have hundreds of blogs and articles on there, and a lot of resources for caregivers.
Okay. Now, you know, every May is Older Americans Month in this country.
Yes.
You might team up with the Center 50 Plus and or the Kaiser Salem Senior Center and see if you can get a booking one day during May to show some of the films and all.
Yeah, they've been very generous to me in the past. And I wanted to mention that the second edition, some things have changed in this country.
Letters from Madeline, Madelyn.
Some things have changed since I published this in 2007.
Good.
There is more awareness of the need to support caregivers now than there has ever been. And I found a publisher. I was down to just a few books, and I found a publisher, Right Life Publishing, who has agreed to publish my book, the second edition. So I rewrote the prologue and the epilogue, and I added an addendum at the back that provides a lot of tips for caregivers, and that will be in bookstores on May 17th.
Good.
Yeah.
So be careful if a candidate for Congress or the Senate or the presidency comes into your hometown. Make sure they have caregiver rights and caregiver options on their agenda. Maybe every community college in the United States should have caregiver training and senior centers as well.
I believe that is a really important thing that we need to do.
And family leave could include being given time off to take a caregiver class.
Yes, or to take care of a loved one. It is, caregivers are often invisible, and I think that it can be very easy to forget about them, but I think as our healthcare reform kicks into high gear, that medical communities are starting to understand that the benefit of supporting caregivers, because if you can keep the caregiver healthy, then the readmissions for the care receiver are more inclined to go down. And you're more likely to keep the care receiver in the home rather than going into long-term care. So I'm encouraged. I think there is more interest in caregiving, more appreciation for family caregivers, and more support out there than there's ever been. It's not enough, but we're making progress.
We're out of time, but okay.
Okay.
Good. Thank you so much,
Thank
Elaine
you,
Sanchez.
Thank you.
And before you age, before your hair turns grayish, mine is a little touched up now. Use your gray matter and feel that you're ready to take on not only the world but yourself. Self-care counts. Goodbye for now. Have a happy month of February.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay, Doug.